Meep. Me, 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 me. Me, 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 me. Doop it doop doop it doop doop da doop 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 da 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 da. Sound check. Hey, it's all with another video, and today I'm going to talk about some of the things that I don't like about the Battle for Azeroth expansion. And you might already be immediately thinking to yourself, hey, that's way too soon, right? But I'm sure that there are many of you that might also be thinking, it ain't soon enough. This expansion is dog doo. Why didn't you talk about any of this stuff sooner? So this video is going to be kind of personal. It's going to be my personal feedback as to what I think about this very early part of the expansion and just what I think about this part. This has very little to do with me trying to speak for the community or based on what everyone's saying, I think this. No, this is just my feedback. So think of this as maybe kind of a lesson on how to give proper feedback to Blizzard Entertainment regarding your constructive criticism of the World of Warcraft. Or not. Because this is my personal opinion based on my experience in the expansion so far, feel free to disagree. I guarantee that there will be items here on this list that you will either agree with or disagree with, and I would love to hold a bit of a conversation in a comment below. It's fine. This is where discussion takes... I'm talking too much. Let me just get started. I have a bit of a problem with how scaling was handled in this early part of the expansion. And, there are two kinds of scaling that we know of. There is one, the whole idea with secondary stat rating. As you level up from 110 to 120, you find yourself getting a little bit weaker. And especially when you get to level 116, your legendaries deactivate, you stop feeling less good. There were problems with that, and that was addressed in the developer Q&A with Ian and Josh. That was one part of it. The other part is something that has been, really loud over on Reddit and forums and other such things with regards to item level scaling. And this is also something that was talked about in the developer Q&A with regards to whenever we get a little bit stronger, mobs in the open world, not in instanced areas, but just in the open world, get a tiny bit stronger. So we're always going to outpace mobs on the open world. People didn't like that anyway. There were reactions and overreactions and other such things. And I guess the problem that I have with it isn't so much that scaling is in there, period. It's that there is a big difference between how scaling was implemented in patch 7.2 way back in Legion and how things are now. And that is primarily because right now we're at the beginning of an expansion. And previously in 7.2, obviously that was not in the beginning of the expansion. The difference between these two situations is that at the moment, let's see, according to this, in about 1 week, we're going to get the season to start, where we're going to get raiding and PvP and mythic keystones and other such things. And we don't have that right now, though. So when it comes to the scaling, one of the big problems that players are having is that they're having trouble with questing out in the open world, and that's a big problem. And they just don't have a lot of opportunities to gear up elsewhere. The only other options that they have right now are dungeons. In a week or 2 or 3, we're going to have a lot more options available to us with, like I said, PvP and war fronts and raids and other such things. So my little bit of feedback for Blizzard in this case is that scaling is fine. It's something that I personally am fine with. However, I think it'll be better if it was implemented when all the opportunities for gear are available to all players. So as in implement scaling starting at item level. In this, I guess, using BFA as an example, implement scaling starting at item level like 340, 350 or so. That's when you're going to start to see like a bit of that difference, a bit of that slowdown and evenness with mobs getting slightly stronger. That's it, really. The next item that I have to talk smack about is about cooking. And, maybe all of the other professions, actually. The professions feel a little bit lackluster. There are fewer fun things that you can make. I think that's always been a point of weirdness with the professions. There are a number of players that are like, oh man, we always want to have cool things to make with professions, or we want to have a return to having personal benefits to having professions. And there are in this case, because people that can make primary gear, those folks can eventually make their own mythic raid gear, which is cool, but there's just less fun things. Like, for example, with cooking, there aren't there's not really any fun food. Yes, we get the stat food and we get the feasts and all that stuff. And thankfully, there's no Nomi to worry about because Nomi sucks. But there's no like fun food. There's no equivalent to Bear Tartar. There's no equivalent to the Fighter Chow. Those are things that players were able to greatly take advantage of in places like Mythic Plus or doing other dungeon runs. Having that stuff be nerfed so heavily after Legion, but at the same time not having a BFA equivalent is kind of a bummer. I wouldn't mind it so much if food from previous expansions just lost their coolness, but at the same time, with the new expansion, there is going to be replacement food that will bring back this coolness. It feels like there's not enough fun and innovation with professions, with the exception of maybe engineering, which can make some cool stuff, some cool utility things. And don't get me wrong, it's not like professions don't make money. I've seen plenty of evidence of gatherers and crafters making plenty of dough. It just feels like the coolness factor isn't quite there. I think one thing that could be nice, if there was some sort of long-term, like a really long-tailed quest line or some sort of crafting path that will eventually lead us to make some really awesome transmog sets, like a full top-to-bottom set. I think something like that would be cool, a way to show off and celebrate the work that you put into your profession other than, at least right now, the two mythic pieces that you can make for yourself. Something like the Thunderforge weapons back in Mist of Pandaria, where you had to make a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 sort of thing. Like, those were really cool. I don't know if they should be BOEs that you can sell or if there's something that you could just make yourself, but I think it's just one way to differentiate yourself as a profession person from everyone else. This next part isn't so much feedback, it's just me kind of bitching for a little bit. The auction house and the guild bank lag it's damn near untenable. It really, really sucks, especially as someone who does a lot of profession stuff and selling things on the market. I do in fact think that everyone can agree with me on this one, so that's really all I gotta say. I'm just gonna move on. Reputations once again feel like a lesson that was only half learned by Blizzard after Legion. Reputations were in fact one of the biggest critiques that I had about Legion because as you wrapped up with say like Court of Horrendous, it didn't really mean much aside from getting that rep milestone and being able to get that little piece of gear or that pet or that tabard, whatever. I say that this lesson was half learned in Battle for Azeroth because with regards to Champions of Azeroth, as well as the Honorbound or the 7th Legion faction, as you wrap up with them, you start to unlock more of a quest line. In this case, it was the war campaign. There was a little bit more to do to forward the story. However, the other factions were pretty much forgotten. That, in my opinion, sucks, especially in the face of there being so many freaking quests that are separated between the Horde and Alliance. I think that some of that energy could have been put into a short little quest line, just a couple of things to do every time you hit honored, revered, exalted, to celebrate what you had done for these factions so they would either thank you or there would be some sort of capstone to their storyline that would just feel cool and reward something like neat at the very end. Again, I go back to Mist of Pandaria because I really like the way that they did their reputations. Once you hit a milestone, you get more of this progression, this progressing quest line up into this grand finale. So I am grateful for that kind of roleplay element that Blizzard tied in with either the Honorbound or 7th Legion, as well as the Champions of Azeroth, even though that's like a really small item. But just do more. Or, like I had said, take some of that energy and effort that was put into the many quest lines and side quests that were put into the Horde and Alliance questing experience and just put it into like these little celebrations of reputation. So far, I'm quite happy with how World PvP or War Mode is working out. I've been one of those folks that would see someone fighting a bunch of mobs at low health and I'd straight up kill them or I'd stun them and watch them die. I'm very, very cruel because at the same time, if I happen to be at low health and you want to take me out, cool, go ahead, I deserve it. Or if there's like 5 or 10 guys that are just sweeping through and they run train on my ass, well then I deserved it for being by myself anyway. I like that, I don't mind it. But I think it would have been a good idea for Blizzard to be a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more risky to try and introduce more things that would spice up War Mode. I had a couple of ideas early on that are sort of parallel to that random drop of a chest that you would see every now and then. Like instead, if there was some sort of convoy that was going through a good chunk of the zone, and it was your job to defend this convoy. And as you're defending it, you get little bits of honor, you get a nice bit of honor at the end. But at the same time, the opposite faction would be like, okay, if you kill all these dudes that are trying to defend this convoy, of course you're going to get honor yourself. And so it's just more ways to propagate more open PvP in these areas. Ways to introduce a little bit more chaos, because right now it's more like, okay, we're going to camp these certain areas with world quests, where world quests exist, so we can fight, which is cool because it's a natural thing. It's not like some forced sort of PvP thing. But at the same time, having a little bit of that forced stuff, it might be cool to at least experiment with and tweak. One of the biggest critiques of this expansion from the get-go, just the introduction of Azerite gear, was that they're too lackluster. The traits are boring, they're passive, they don't do anything. I've made my own counterpoints and parallels with how they're quite similar to artifacts, but instead I'm going to talk about how this first iteration of Azerite traits is more similar to tier. So in about a week, we're going to get the first raid of Battle for Azeroth, the Uldir raid, and many of you might have seen the traits. Some of them seem cool, some of them seem not so cool, or you just might think they're dog poop, whatever. But if you also think of the parallels of tier gear, you kind of think to yourself that all the Azerite gear that we're seeing up to this point is considered like tier 1 of this expansion. Yes, sure, some of this stuff is boring, and with regards to the dungeon stuff, while it will grow more powerful over time as we get into Mythic Plus dungeons and what have you, there's still going to be those kinds of traits. We're not going to see anything new until if we see new dungeons. And then of course we're going to see more maybe elaborate traits when we get into future raids. Unfortunately, I don't have a great solution for this, because I guess Blizzard designed themselves into a tough spot. If they make these traits too good, then the meta is going to be even more strictly defined, and certain dungeons will be forgotten because, oh, there's nothing that drops from there. Certain loot from bosses are going to be even more hotly contested. Maybe it's okay that Blizzard was a bit more conservative with this first round of Azerite traits. However, the fact that there just isn't a whole lot going on, like there's no legendaries, there's no other artifact stuff, and the pruning and all the other critiques that we've been hearing about, I can understand where players are like, oh, this is boring, there's like nothing going on, I don't feel any stronger. This is well beyond my ability as an armchair designer, but if there was a way to better visualize the impact of Azerite gear whenever you're possibly like stacking traits or otherwise working with the meta, I think that it would compel players a little bit more to feel excited for these traits. What I'm trying to think of in this open and scriptless video is that let's pretend that the Azerite Trait UI, instead of having a UI for each piece of gear, it's a single UI where you'll see here's the head, here's the shoulders, and here's the chest. You can see everything on screen like all at once. And from there, you choose your traits. You'll be able to visualize all the things that are possible with this certain combination of gear. Like I said, it's hard to visualize, but I think that the impact of applying traits to your gear would feel a little bit better for players if they can see it all at once. Maybe that's not the solution, but maybe that's one thing that would at least appeal to me a little bit more, even though clicking on those traits sounds really cool. So I only have one more bit of a critique to make. There's only so much that we've experienced in this expansion so far, and this video is probably kind of long. So the last bit of smack talk that I have, and you folks at home and on the toilet might be a little bit upset for me to say this, is that I think that the auto-accept is being a bit too lenient, maybe? I guess I have a problem with just zerging down the rares out in the open world as it is right now. So the downvote thing is over there in case you missed it, because I'm going to say that I'm a fan of not having an auto-accept sort of dealy when it comes to doing menial world quests. And I'm taking this even further when it comes to the rares that we're fighting, and I'm talking about the tougher rares that do warrant the whole group finding and auto-accept dealy that is currently in this expansion. I actually think that being able to auto-accept up to the maximum raid size, 40 people, is a bit too much, and that it should be balanced down to maybe 10 people. This is a really unpopular idea, but hey, this is my feedback, right? These rares don't feel very balanced for 30, 40 people. It feels like they're better suited for a group of 10. I don't think it's great for a group of 5 because it's very unlikely that you'll be able to get, a balanced team of a tank and heals and ranged and melee DPS together. But I also think that having 20 or 30 or 40 people just zerging down a thing without having so much as anything to worry about, with the exception of maybe that one rare over in Tirogard Sound, the one that does like the fire and all that stuff, that one gets pretty crazy. Very few of the rares feel actually dangerous because there's so many people that are zerging it down that it doesn't really matter. In a week and some change, when we start seeing world bosses, then I'm totally fine with having a full-on raid group of however many people you want to zerg this thing down. But when it comes to encountering these rares, I just think that it should be limited to a smaller amount. As for how to do it, I don't know. And if people want to manually accept more people into it, that's totally fine. But I think that auto-accepting in those areas, it should be limited to 10. And then after that, you can just keep accepting people if you want, I suppose. And maybe people will just do that anyway. But I just feel like those rares would feel a little bit more epic and fun if they felt slightly harder with having the smaller group size. So that's it for me. I think I'm done vindicating or defiling your own opinions of this expansion so far. But I'd love to hear what some of your personal input is on some of the things on this expansion that you don't like. I want to learn more about what you folks think. Not that you're wrong or to disagree with you, but I want to get just kind of a better gauge as to just what are the feelings of players that have a little bit to say. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you're new around here, please subscribe so that you can get more of this and all things Warcraft. Don't forget to like this video, leave some feedback below, and otherwise, I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.